Thank you, Susie.
So I'm going to start off with a little bit on here. So this started trending a couple of weeks ago. Remember this? Muslims report stuff. So for those, so this happened shortly after this is Mustafa Bayomi's tweet that started this, which is, I'm a Muslim and I would like to report a crazy man threatening a woman on a stage in Missouri. So I got really excited when I saw. I was like, wow, this is cool. Like a lot of Muslims, because Trump wants us Muslims to report things that are suspicious and things about us. So because we need to take on our duty. We have to do our civic duty of helping out. So, but my thing is like, Donald, this is great, but you're a little late to the game. I mean, I've been kind of doing this for a long time now. I'm going on 14 years. So I have this that if you go to my website, you see at all times where I am and what I'm doing. So some of you might recognize that campus and that image that's on top. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So on November 19th, I spent $2.13 at buying a chili dog at the Chevron in Rosedale Chevron in Bakersfield, California. So this is outside of Edwards Air Force Base, by the way. And then on Sunday, November 11th, this happens to be in 2009, but you don't know that's 2009, but I can tell you it's 2009. If you cross-reference all the other data, you'd realize it was 2009. And at that location, I made a phone call at 3:11 p.m. and 09th of second at 3:11:09 p.m. And this happens to be the location of Northrop Grumman's Astro and Aerospace lab in Santa Cruz. I was on this Muni ride in San Francisco on November 30th. These are all these bits and pieces that I keep sending out. And if you go to the site, there's thousands and thousands, about 85,000 images right now that have been posted. And I've been sending this to the FBI. I've been reporting stuff. I've been kind of doing this before, like the idea of like the hashtags even started. So I get really excited about this now when other people are joining in. I mean, there's photos of me transiting through various airports. So on May 1st, I was here, and then a lot of empty places. I loiter around a lot of empty, desolate, dark, stark, empty. I guess I just don't like being around people. So this is outside of Beaverton in Oregon at a strip mall, or you can see that on November 17th, I had these pieces of double fried chicken wings at my favorite Chinese place next to the PATH train station in Newark. And then in late July of 2012, I was at the Palace Station Hotel in Las Vegas. You don't exactly know what happened, but the photo is there that I was there. So these are just facts, just the facts, because you don't want to be reporting like too much details on those, because there's only so much you can actually report. Even I know Trump wants us to like go into details and give us like all sorts of information, but there's also bits and pieces. And then for full disclosure, there's also a few hundred toilets that I've shared with the FBI, because the FBI needs to know my business and they need to know what I'm doing. Why am I doing this? Well, so I created. Actually, let's go to the live version of that site, so you can actually see what's going on here. So I started this, and this was shortly after 9/11. I was reported as a terrorist. It's a brown guy, Muslim. I mean, what else? So if you see something, say something. So it turned out that someone who had seen something somewhere, which actually was not true at all, called up the authorities and said an Arab man fled who was hoarding explosives. An Arab man who fled on September 12th. And that Arab man would be me, even though I'm not Arab. But, it's one of those things. I guess supposedly they kind of all look alike. Anyway, so I spent 6 months of my life with the FBI in this building right here. That's the federal building in Tampa, Florida, where I used to live. And so during that whole time, it's basically going through all sorts of little bits and details and going in and out of these, getting, interrogated. And going through all of these questions of where were you on this date, where were you on this date, and who pays for this trips, and who pays for that trips, all these bits and details. And then after about 6 months of this, and 9 consecutive polygraphs, they said, okay, everything's fine. I was like, I know everything's fine. That's what I've been trying to tell you guys all along. Can you guys give me a letter saying that I'm fine? And there's a little bit of a problem with that in the law, because in order to be not guilty of something you never did, that it doesn't really work that way. But in the case of the national security and the magic wand that comes with terrorism, well, it's a whole different story. So essentially I decided that before I would go anywhere, I would call the FBI, my FBI agent, and I would say, hey, I'm not up to anything shady. I'm just doing this, just letting you know this is where I'm going. This is what I'm up to. So, basically you can see I'm just standing in line here, not doing anything shady. But I would call, and then those phone calls turned to emails, and the emails got really long, like really, really, really long. I would give my FBI agent travel tips on where to go and such. And he would always write back, thank you, be safe. So yeah, I would seriously write him thousands and thousands of words. You ever get those emails from those friends that just write you that really long thing, and you don't really know what to make of it? But here I thought I was having a connection with the FBI agent, and I thought they were good listeners, but I would always only get back 4 words. It's kind of really unfair, if you want to say it. So I would send him all of these bits and pieces, and during this process, I came to this realization, well, wait a minute, why is this FBI agent so special? Why is it just him? So why don't I just send everything to everybody? So that's when I decided to open this up in public. And really what happens is, by borrowing one of the simplest forms of, simple principles of economics, of supply and demand, essentially it devalues the entire FBI system, or the information that the FBI has. So the FBI, as well as many other intelligence agencies, regardless of who they are, they all operate in an industry where their commodity or their currency is information. And having the restricted access to that is what makes that information valuable. So let's cut out the middleman and let's just give it to you directly. And if I give it to you directly, and if you have everything that the FBI has, the information that the FBI has doesn't have any value. Thus, it devalues the entire currency. Now, 14 years ago, people thought I was crazy. Why in the world would you want to do this? It's like, why would you go around? Why do you want to tell everybody all these details of where you are and what you're doing? And then now, sometimes I'll talk to some folks about it, and they're like, I don't get it. This looks like my Instagram feed. It's like, what's the big deal? It's funny that how this act of sharing private information publicly was such an unusual thing not that long ago. And yet these days, if we're not on some type of a social media, it almost seems as if we're some type of a digital outcast. There's a lot of shifts that have taken place in culture and a lot of things. And I want to go back, so when you look at this map, for example, one of the things when I first started this project was looking at yourself as a pixel. The idea of a body and a data body. This was a very detached thing. I mean, I think many of us can remember the first time we saw aerial views of our homes, and you got all weirded out because you saw that, you recognized that tree and your car outside, or the first time you ever saw your place on Google Street View. It was a very unusual and unsettling experience, and now it's become so common. Now we're driving down the street, you see that little icon of your car going down as that pixel. So we've learned to associate that. There was a time not that long ago where you'd have to sit there and you'd open up that map and you'd go, we're here. So you'd have to locate yourself to the geography. You can't even buy road maps anymore. I mean, you go to a gas station, they don't even sell them anymore. I mean, you really have to go out of your way to try to find a printed road map, because now we just take that little gadget out of our hands and out of our pockets, and we press that little triangle, and you become the center of your map. The map resizes to you, and our map, so each of our individual identity of our data bodies have different maps that go correspondingly with that. So I think this is a huge difference in what's happening. So also during this project, what you're seeing is you're seeing a whole bunch of information that's coming up, and most of it's coming up in, well, rather user-unfriendly manner. It's not exactly the neat little packaged way. And one of the reasons for that is intelligence agencies don't necessarily get their information in a nice, neat package. I mean, it comes in, a dot here, a dot there, and a dot there, and a dot there, seemingly unrelated. And then you have to do the job of the FBI agent in retracing this with that, with that, with that. So really you have to play the role of the FBI agent. But what I'm really doing in this case, even though I'm telling you everything, even though I'm providing so many of my detailed information to you, it's actually camouflage. It's digital camouflage. I'm putting up so much noise out there that for you to decipher which piece of information is valuable and which one isn't, you would really have to replay the role of the FBI agent fully. So as more and more of us start putting our lives online, and you may choose to very actively not put anything online, but That doesn't mean someone else isn't doing that on you, on your behalf. Even times that you think you're completely not being surveilled. So think of it this way. So let's just presume you live in a bunker, like in the middle of like just total secret. And the minute you've walked in, your power company knows you've walked in the door because you've turned the lights on. Your water company knows every time when you shower every morning. Does that kind of creep you out? I don't know. I mean, it's those types of things. Even when we think we're not being monitored, we are. Everything, there's so much information about us available, and actually sometimes when not having enough information about us online can be more problematic than having too much information. Rick Santorum had this problem not that long ago, where Google didn't make him look too flattering. And you can't go to Google and say, hey Google, this is making me look bad, please delete this. It doesn't work that way. But you can't delete it, but you can bury it. It won't be necessarily the first thing on page 1, but it could be on page 40. But in order to put it on page 40, you need 39 pages of information, and you would rather be in that position to generate those 39 pages of information. So I want to go back to this idea of camouflage, and then I want to show you an early work. So this is the work from 2006. And at first, it just looks like a modernist grid of images. But what it really is when you think about camouflage, well, historically, camouflage, when you think, it's the soldiers would use it so the enemy could not distinguish the silhouette of the body. And so therefore, the soldier would blend into the landscape of warfare. So you couldn't tell the difference between the bush or the tree or the whatever, and then the soldier. Have you noticed the camouflage that our troops are wearing today? Yeah, you ever seen trees that color anywhere? It's this greenish, grayish, whitish, and it's pixels. It's pixels. And there's a very interesting reason why it's pixels, because it's no longer about the need for the soldier to blend into the landscape, but it's the need for the soldier to blend into the digital artifact that's created from the noise in the night vision goggles. So the enemy cannot distinguish between the digital noise and the human body. So we have this convergence of data body and physical body once again. And this is something that's become very normal. So what I did is I took a sample from one of the early samples of the camouflage that was being designed by our Army's fashion design department. They don't call it the fashion design department, but for all practical purposes, that's what they do. And I pulled out a sample of that early digital camo, and then I replaced the pixels with images of historic or present conflict. So for example, this plate of ham that just looks like, well, a plate of ham, actually happens to be shot in Guernica. And then right on top of that, those two blue images, those happen to be inside the 38th, north of the 38th parallel, technically inside of North Korea, at the DMZ. There's several other images over there. We could go on forever about it, but let me just move forward a little bit so I can talk to a little bit about this. So going back to this thing, so I created this so the FBI can find me at any moment, at any time. So really, I'm telling you everything, and I'm telling you absolutely nothing. And by putting everything public, I actually maintain a very anonymous and private life. And I encourage a lot of people to do this. So I've been looking at a lot of relationship between warfare and art. And I've been very interested in this document. So I ran across a congressional document called Instances of Use of United States Armed Forces Abroad. It's a document that's produced as a congressional report. And it basically chronicles every time US troops have been used overseas for other than peaceful purposes. Everything from like back in 1843, Marines chased pirates onto a Caribbean island somewhere, all the way down to World War I. So everything is just one entry. It's amazing like how everything is just reduced to just a single entry and just the facts type of a thing. So I decided to take this map and take this document and map it. Where do these things take place? And you're going, wait, when did we invade Florida? Well, that was before it was before it became U.S. territory. That was when it was Spanish territory. So all the white X's are the invasions from 1776 to World War I. All the gray X's are from World War I to Vietnam, and all the dark X's are Vietnam to today. The number of invasions from 1776 to World War I roughly equate the numbers from World War I to Vietnam, and the numbers from 1776 to Vietnam roughly equate the number of invasions from Vietnam to today. We're not on a good trajectory here. We've only declared war 11 times in history. Actually, we're currently at war on terror. And I'm not really sure how terror gives up and says, "You guys win, it's over." But if you think about it, so this is a pretty sobering image in looking at this. So this was a drawing that I did for a piece that I worked with. Actually, Susie and I were talking about Steve Dietz earlier, and so this was for a show in Spain. And I wanted to create this piece. So my proposal, and Lisa, you'll love this as a museum director, I was thinking, okay, let's put a huge sheet of bulletproof glass in the middle of the space, and we'll have a rough outline of the world, and then we'll have a marksman at one end of it, and then the audience will be at the other, and they'll fire at the audience, and the bullet will stop at the glass. I mean, I knew there was no way the museum was going to go for it. I knew there was absolutely no way. I was expecting them to say, "You're absolutely crazy. There's no way we're doing this." To my surprise, they said, "We'll look into it." And they did some ballistics tests, and it looks beautiful. I mean, visually, it's this beautiful image of what happens when bullets. So this is like really capturing that violence of what happens when that bullet actually hits and makes that impact. And bulletproof glass, the way it works is that because it's coming in at such speed, it's very dense plastic, and it melts and it swallows it up. It swallows the bullet, and the bullet stays lodged like that. Sure enough, shortly after, they called me and they said, "You're absolutely crazy. There's no way we're doing this." But what we did is we created this piece, and this was for a show in Spain. And in Spain, there's a pesky little law about how you can't discharge a weapon in less than 25 meters of its intended target, meaning that you have to be at least roughly 80 feet away from shooting at anything. Except these targets are like a quarter inch. They're like these tiny little things. And so how do you get this? So the museum hired 3 former Olympians to shoot this. And and of the 330 bullets that are, here you can see, for example, like how many times we hit Central America. I mean, we've invaded Central America so many times that the glass literally just shattered and gave away. It was a literal wreck. And when you touch it on the other side, because it hits it and then it gives it a little bump, and it hits it again, and it gives it a little bit more, and then eventually, if it hits it enough, it just blasts through. So there was 330 invasions up to the moment of the show. And of the 330, 326 of them were shot exactly on center, and the 4 they're off by a quarter. I'm just convinced I just drew them wrong. I mean, they were so scary accurate. So this is something that I'm very interested in going on over here. So looking at the idea of war and conquest and expansion, I've been thinking a lot about these types of works. So this is a body of work that I've been working on. It's kind of going on and off for about 4 years now. So when you look at surveillance camera imagery, when I mention the word surveillance camera imagery or the term, you're generally thinking of a pixely, gritty, grainy type of an image. We have this thing, surveillance camera. I wouldn't be surprised if that's in video production. That's like a filter now. But the reality is that when you look at the quality of the photos that are taken with your tiny little cell phone camera, which has a chip that's 1/10 of an inch, with that absolutely tiny little sensor, and the images actually look really good. There's no reason why the surveillance camera image has to look the way the surveillance camera images look. And what it is that when we hyper-aestheticize the image, your brain rejects it as surveillance, and it reads it as landscape. Because we need that aesthetic for us to relate to the context of that image. Okay, so let's go backwards. So if we hyper-aestheticize it and it starts reading as in as a landscape image or in landscape photography, which in American history or in American landscape history, it's based on landscape paintings. It was the same thing. When we sent the exploratory photographers out west, it was to survey and measure and document the expansion of the country. It was to take inventory of that mountain and what the natural resources were in that mountain, because that belonged to us. In the same way, we sent these painters out in a time before photography and they would come back with these beautiful images. So even though we tend to think of landscape as, at least today, this very harmless kind of romantic idea of just the landscape image, there's a tremendous level of political power behind that landscape. And it really is about taking inventory of an expanding country, and it is a document of the expansion of power, this idea of manifest destiny. As our country expands further and further and further, those images were brought in, and we were claiming these images as this is our territory. So in this image, what happened is that, these are 6 monitors. I mean, it looks like a window pane, but it's supposed to look like a window pane. So imagine you could see directly through the wall. What would you see? And that's what this was. And this just so happened that this exhibition space was directly across the street from the Baltimore Police Department, which also has an interesting history in itself. I live in Baltimore, and we have our sets of issues with police in Baltimore and just the city structure in general. And so when you looked out the window, it basically looked like what a surveillance camera would see, except you didn't know whether you were seeing a moving image or a video image. Every now and then there'd be a light, a blur, but this is really what the data sees. When you look at what surveillance cameras do, it's not really the image, it's the computer behind it that's actually looking at it. So anytime you go in and you see those like 20, 30, 40 monitors with someone in front of it, no one's looking at those. It's not humanly possible to process that much information. It's really a machine. There's software underneath. It's like, okay, so for example, if there's an image of a train, okay, so there's that train station. Okay, train goes by, person. And then if something doesn't fit that algorithm, it calls it out. So all the really heavy stuff is being done underneath, but it's actually not very sexy looking at all, like the 20, 30 monitors. And actually, a lot of folks in this business will tell you that that's used purely for fundraising. The actual thing that's happening is all underneath. So this image that you'd walk into, it changes this thing of looking at landscape and looking at that history of landscape, and also looking at the history of American landscape as well. If you root that back to the Hudson River School of Painters, these beautiful, gorgeous, grand vistas from above, often almost these like sublime, almost spiritual paintings. This way of almost connecting with God, or also as looking at God as the original surveillance camera, because this is, you behaved because God was watching. So we tend to think of surveillance as being this relatively 21st century post 9/11 concept, yet this has been embedded in us for thousands and thousands of years of being watched from above, except now it just so happens to be a camera instead of an actual idea. So I'm going to go through a couple of other art objects. So this was an installation done at the Elizabeth Foundation in New York, and that is what you would see on the other side of the wall. There's also something really beautiful about like this idea of X-ray vision, of seeing through objects. I mean, that's also how Customs scans those cargo ships coming in. There's these cameras that they actually read right through the containers. So it's referring to that as well as referring to these early landscape paintings simultaneously. And this is a similar object that took place in, this is at the Scottsdale Museum, and this is exactly what was on the other side of the wall. And you didn't really know what you were seeing. I mean, it's, you didn't know whether you were looking at a still video or a photograph on video monitors, or whether, but except all the way in the lower right-hand corner on that yellow pole, every now and then this pigeon would walk around and circle around that. And that was the only way that you knew that it was actually a video image that you were looking at, because it moved so slowly. Well, kind of what a surveillance camera would see. I mean, when you look at that image just as the image itself, not necessarily for the content of what it is, it becomes something completely different. And let me show you a little bit about what it looked like in context. So I had this one piece in the front, and then there was an orb in the back. So all those images that you saw that ran through on this website. So all of these images, were shown. Actually, that's kind of not too far from here. Those images were shown as individual monitors, or these orbs, almost looking at these Sputnik-type early satellites, landmines. They function visually on both sides of those. And this piece, there's an opening this weekend, Tuesday, at the Southeast Center for Contemporary Art in North Carolina. That this installation is being rebuilt. But let me show you a little bit about. So in looking back into this idea of landscape and context, this is probably the most recent work that I just finished. And this is in Mauna Kea, the tip of, which is actually the tallest mountain in the world if you measure from the base. I mean, Everest is really high, but if you measure from the top, from the base of the mountain to the top of the mountain, and then compare that to Mauna Kea. Mauna Kea, I mean, because 2/3 of it's submerged into the Pacific Ocean and it slowly comes up. And in Hawaiian culture, the peaks of each of the of the islands are sacred. Interestingly enough, every single peak of the Hawaiian Islands is also either military or government, or US government in terms of science, or sometimes both. So when you go up to the peak, you see these images, you see these like observatories everywhere. So, and Hawaii is a really interesting example of manifest destiny. So not only now that we've expanded to the edge, to the Pacific Ocean, now we've gone across the ocean, we found this little rock in the middle of the ocean, and not only found this rock, now we're at the tip of that rock, and now we're going outward in terms of measuring the entire space and the satellites that are out there from the tip of the top of the part of the mountain. So, and also there's interestingly things in, you know, if you look at like the way Hawaii was, I hesitate to say annexed into the US because there's a lot of controversy about how Hawaii became a state. But nonetheless, it's a really interesting way of looking at how manifest destiny fits in with this. So anyway, so what I did is I went to the top and I have a video that just shoots 360 all around for an entire day. It just keeps shooting all around. And that's what you saw when you walked in. Let me show you a couple of stills from it because it's actually really interesting to look at this in that way. So it looks like Mars, doesn't it? I mean, it just looks like something from another planet. Actually, they did some of the Mars rover testing up there. And then you see these types of things, and then the way the clouds come in. I just love being up there. It was, and if you're interested in going, it's one of the craziest things is that you go from sea level to about 14,000 feet in under 40 minutes. So it's normally in other places you never have that type of a change that rapidly. But so okay, so let me go and show you a couple of other pieces. I'm going to change it a little bit. So this is a piece called Thousand Little Brothers, or part of it. And all those images that you saw in the orb, that with all the satellite-looking things, and all the images that I've been collecting. So every few moments I upload something. I mean, there's a photo of the outside of the building. There's photos of right before you got into here. So every few moments I timestamp my life and I send this out to the FBI. And when you're looking at this image, well, the actual piece is about 27 feet tall. So you're actually only looking at a small section of it. And each image is basically every other image uploaded to the FBI. So, but then you look, and it looks like these color bars. It looks like these like visual patterns. But at the same time, this is also the SMPTE color bars that you'd use for color calibration for signals for video, which is also an interesting thing in the idea of like we have so much information, so much digital information that our data bodies are. So how do you calibrate those? So, and the color bars is what the tool itself uses for calibration of information. The other thing that's also interesting in it is that, and you wouldn't know this without me actually explaining this to you, but when you look at this, these are all the Sunday images, all the Monday images, all the Tuesday, Wednesday. So they're all each day of the week, and they're cataloged in a very specific manner. Again, if you were the FBI, if you were my FBI agent, you would probably recognize that. Or maybe at this time he's just completely forgotten about it. He's just like, I've seen enough of your toilets. Or it could be that you're going through all of them. So let me show you what this looked like. This was a piece at ZKM in Karlsruhe. We created this with the museum as light boxes. And just to give you a sense of scale, this is what they look like with a person in front of them. These are tiny little images. Each image is like maybe like an inch by, maybe not even an inch, like 3/4 of an inch by an inch. And there's thousands and thousands and thousands of them. So it's this complete overload. And then, so similarly, this is what I have at Skidmore College last year. And this was, I decided to split them up with these black and white images in between. And it just looks like an industrial building, like a rooftop of an industrial building, until you get to the lower right, which is like, that's not a normal building. That happens to be the rooftop of the NSA, which is kind of interesting because, like when you think about like libraries and NSAs, I mean, the NSA kind of does the same thing as a library. I mean, it's a storage collection. It's a data collection system. I mean, you store and you collect all these pieces of information. And this is where it all gets processed and it all gets analyzed. So in a lot of ways, some people will refer to these images as selfies. I mean, they kind of are. I mean, instead of like my camera pointing in at me, that my camera is pointed outward. And I think the selfie is really interesting because I want to show you this. So this is, and the selfie gets absolutely no respect, except here's President Obama trying to make it look respectful and presidential. I think it's about as presidential as you can make a selfie look. Let me show you this image. So this image is, this image, many of you recognize this. I mean, you saw this image, right? And this is when you take the image, this is what you see. This is what we see. So when we take our selfies and then you see the image, but the computer and the data and the NSA are seeing something very different. They're not exactly seeing this image particularly. What they're actually seeing is this. Well, this is just some of the data. I mean, I'm sure they're seeing more than just this. But if you download any sort of EXIF reader, you can see the data behind your image. So you can see it's shot, you can see the latitude, longitude. We know all that. We know that's how it knows. Like, would you like to upload from here? When you're checking in, it tells you this location versus that location. This is how it knows because it looks at the GPS and it reverses that. But it gets something really interesting. When you start looking at this area, actually you can't see my mouse on the screen, but when you go over here, so we know that the image direction is 217.7280701754386 degrees to north. We know that it's 42 latitude, longitude. Our altitude, we're at 183 feet. Does that sound about right for Evanston? 183 feet above sea level? Any like people that know this off the top of your head? What?
Maybe it's in meters.
Okay, it's probably in meters. Okay, if it's 700 feet, then it is in meters, yes. So you're looking at that, and you could see that the speed is 0 because I was not moving at the time. But so what we now have is this is so just a few years ago was this crazy idea that you mean Google is going to drive up and down every single street and photographing every single house and every single road? Yes. Not only they do that several times a year. In the same way how we have an archive of every external space, we have a photograph of every external image, it's only a matter of time before we have every internal space photographed and documented and cross-referenced. So once we have this, so if we know that the inside of your selfie at 217 degrees, this is what it looks like, and at 290 degrees, it looks like this, and at 0 degrees, it looks like this, we stitch that together. If that's in a database, we can recreate every internal space. So this is where it gets kind of scary in that thing. And all of this is archived. Everything that we do is archived and everything is collected. This is a piece that I did a few years ago called Hawkeye. Now, Hawkeye didn't really get the kind of attention that it probably should have. Back in 2007, there was an NSA, there was an AT&T employee, the whistleblower that said, hey, there's something going on in room 641A. And turned out that there were 16 telecom companies prior to that time. Sometime between 9/11 and 2007, there were 16 telecom companies that were approached by the NSA. And the NSA said, hey, we'd like to copy your data stream. And 15 of the 16 said, sure, help yourself. Be our guest. Set yourself up. There's only one company that objected to that, which was Quest. And that company no longer exists. And Bush retroactively pardoned the other 15 countries, the other 15 companies. So they didn't do anything wrong. So in here, so when you look at this building, and I'm sure there's several of these buildings throughout the country, but this is very specifically where it took place with a whistleblower on the 6th floor. This isn't exactly your typical building. If you look at it, there's no, those are not windows, those are vents. It's essentially a gigantic hard drive. It's AT&T's data center at 2nd and Folsom Street in San Francisco. And Hawkeye is AT&T's internal code name for this data center. Hawkeye in 2007 had 312 terabytes of every phone conversation on AT&T's network. How do you read 312 terabytes of data? The thing is, you don't. It's not meant for human consumption. It's meant for machine reading. And also, there's another thing. Well, we may not know how to read it now, but one day we will have the ability to read it. As long as we have the information, we can re-thread all of these pieces together. I think that's where it gets really interesting here. So, so it also brings up another issue of who owns this data. So when you have that conversation with your cousin or with your friend or whoever, does that phone conversation belong to you, or does it belong to AT&T, or does it, or are they giving you a one-time licensing use of it? Who owns this information? It's data. It can be digitized because there's no reason to delete anything. And this is where it gets really interesting, because if you think about it, when you look at information and the way it works, I mean, I don't even delete my spam. I mean, my Gmail does something to it. I mean, there's a gazillion things that happen, and eventually it goes away. But you know, we've all had this this experience where you type in something in a search, and someone comes up, and you've completely forgotten about that. That all of this memory is triggered back about that person. So essentially, what we've done is we've externalized our memory to these objects, whether it be our phone or whether it be Hawkeye. How many phone numbers did you remember off the top of your head, say 10 years ago, or before cell phones? And how many phone numbers do you know right now? Again, because we don't need to do that. It's externalized. So, so another thing I've been thinking about is, why do we think of these phones as these distractions and things? I mean, we don't really think of our eyeglasses as distractions. I mean, they've become part of us. I mean, we understand, like, if you have a knee replacement, or if you have a hip replacement, or an artificial organ of some type, we don't really say, well, that's not me. I mean, of course that's part of it, but why do we think about it the same way with our brain? I mean, essentially, we need to stop thinking of the phone as a phone, but it's really an extension of our brain that we just carry around with us. And we look up things and we talk about, I mean, those are the things, except in this case, that happens to belong to the NSA, or the NSA has access to it. So I want to go back and show a couple of quick little things. So in this case, what we're looking at here is my log files, because and if you have your website, just go through who's coming by. It's pretty amazing to see who comes in and sees things, and who's been stopping in. I mean, and I decoded some of this, and you can see a nice list of all the people. Really friendly folks. Really friendly folks. A lot of sketchy 3-letter and more organizations. They're all kind of in DC though, which is kind of interesting, or kind of, and they've been coming for years. So, like the Terrorist Screening Center, or Naval Undersea Warfare Center, or the Central Intelligence Agency, or the Executive Office of the President. They've been coming by less frequently since the Obama days, but during the Bush days, they were like all over. They were visiting all the time. Don't know why, but they came by. So yeah, I mean, so I work at the University of Maryland, and people a lot of folks just assume that it's in Baltimore. Actually, our med school is in Baltimore. And to further complicate things, I live in Baltimore, but I work in College Park. So College Park, we're essentially inside the DC Beltway. And here's the DC Beltway, and you can see 495 around that. That's where the university is. This is the FBI headquarters. This is the CIA headquarters, and this is the NSA. You triangulate the three, you essentially end up on our campus. And we also happen to be the most militarized university in the US, according to Vice magazine. So somebody's got to do all the NSA research. So this is where it happens. It happens down the street from it happens on our campus. So DC is amazing, but and also trying to having all these organizations that come by and they visit. I figured I'd make it easier for them to move close to them and just come to them instead. And it's great over there, except like real estate is like not cheap. Real estate's like really expensive. If you look at the bottom, the average listing price in St. Michael's, Maryland is $21663. 21663 is $797,000. So it's not exactly a low rent district over here. But so I've been like trying to find a place and live, and I've been doing this for a while. And then I found this piece of land, which is actually pretty decent. And it's about an hour and 15 from campus, which is kind of nice. It's really beautiful out there. You see, it's that little oblong piece of property over there, and then you see that like nice little driveway with all the trees and that really fancy house at the other end. It belongs to this guy. So this way I can also thank him in person, because if it wasn't for Dick Cheney, my art career would not be possible. and because he's made it all possible. So if you know Dick Cheney, please thank him for me. Anyway, so and by the way, so when you leave St. Michael's, which Maryland is a very like blue state, but St. Michael's is a real conservative stronghold. So if you leave St. Michael's Railroad Street, it splits. So it goes to Mount Pleasant and then Mount Misery, and then Mount Misery splits to Church Neck. And the reason it's called Mount Misery, which is the top circle over there, at the end of that street is the Mount Misery Plantation, which was the Covey Plantation, and Covey was known as a pretty brutal slave breaker. So if you had a particularly problematic slave, you sent him to Covey. And Covey would beat him to death, many times, or beat him into shape, thus the name Mount Misery. One particularly problematic slave that was sent to Covey was Frederick Douglass. The Frederick Douglass began his rebellion in that house, which just happens to be right up the street from Dick Cheney, and that house today belongs to Donald Rumsfeld. Anyway, going back to our house, going back to my house over there that I'm going to build, and then Dick's house over here, because, you know, trying to be neighborly. Let me show you a little bit around the neighborhood. So this is his driveway. He's got you go in this way, and then there's this, he has a 5-car garage. It's really, amazing. This is his swimming pool. This is his front room. This is his kitchen. This is where he sleeps. So, when you hear that undisclosed location, it's 7879 Fuller Drive, St. Michael's, Maryland, 21663, in case you want to come by and visit him. And this is where Cheney and I are going to sit and plot world domination. And then this is what I'm planning on building in front of his house. But what's interesting enough, this listing just disappeared. It didn't go sold, it didn't go off market. It wasn't withdrawn, it just disappeared. It's kind of like what he does to some people. So anyway, I started doing these. So I started doing these paintings, or these photographs of paintings of the photographs of the inside of his house. And this is what the project looks like right now. So anyway, so I think the key thing, and I'd like to end with this, is that here's this man, Darth Vader, with every possible resource known in the universe to be private. When he was in office, the vice president's residence, the Naval Observatory, was blurred out. You could not see it on satellite images in Google. This is a man, not only you're dealing with the former vice president, you're dealing with the former CEO of Halliburton. Money was not an object. Neither was motivation. Yet, if I can show you where he sleeps, and if I can get this information, what can he get this about us? What sort of information is available, to companies that specialize in this, governments that have resources beyond our wildest dreams for this thing? So I'd like to end this with thinking that, look, if this is possible, what can we know? What can he know about us? And more importantly, we need to start thinking about what the idea of privacy is differently. We can't think of it in the same way that we have been for the last 20, 30, 40 years. Things have changed drastically. If you just look at the way the internet has changed in the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, except the way we interact with our ideas of privacy and security, we really haven't fully evolved with the technology that's come across. So everything is out there. It's just a matter of how we interpret this, and we really need to be prepared to adapt. It's not a matter of better or worse. It's not going to be that this thing is changing this, and it's that we need to adapt and we need to be proactive to it, and we need to be ready to make those transitions. So thank you very much, and if we have any questions, I'll be ready to take them.
We have time for just a few questions. If you could raise your hand, I'll bring the mic to you.
So do you think that suggestion of Donald Trump, more law and order, also suggests more surveillance?
Trump or not, I think the idea of the more surveillance, I think it's inevitable. It is absolutely inevitable. Just a few bits of data. So between September of 2001 and September 2011, that's 10 years immediately after 9/11, there were 30 million surveillance cameras sold in the US. The population of the US is barely 300 million. There's 308 or 309 million now. That's one camera for every 10 people. So when you look at the number of people in this room, that's pretty scary, and particularly when you look at population density. So I think regardless of who is in power, I think the cameras are only going to increase, but the cameras are just the beginning of it. It's not just about the cameras. Your phone is tracking you way more detailed than I could ever with this software. For all practical purposes, I'm kind of obsolete. When I started this nearly 15 years, it's completely obsolete. And actually, if we have some time later, I can go through and really creep out some of you on how your phone is spying on you. So when you look at your, so this is just the beginning of it. I mean, like Amazon knows exactly what you want to buy before you even want to buy it. It's like, wait, I wasn't even thinking of that, but yeah, I could use this. I mean, think about it. So the surveillance system, it's a much more entangled, and it's much more woven into things that we don't think of as surveillance. So you get all of these really, really interesting things. Like, I mean, sometimes it's actually kind of helpful. Like Netflix says, yeah, would you like to watch this? And you watch, you're like, hey, I really like that. But we don't even think of that way. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of time. As more and more of our bodies become more data body, we will have this. As more and more of our identity is stored as digital information, we're going to have these leaks, we're going to have these hacks, we're going to have our identities dispersed in a lot of ways. This is just the beginning of it. We're making this weird transition between the analog and the digital, and I think it's just a matter of time. We're still learning how to do it. I think we're learning pretty quickly. I think we've adapted pretty quickly, but yeah, certainly.
Thank you very much.
All right, anybody else?
Can you go back and talk a little bit about the experience that led you to create this?
Yeah.
How old were you? How did you ever find out who reported you? How were you cleared?
Okay, so this was 2002. So that would mean I was 30 years old then. So really I've been doing this project like a third of my life, which is also kind of bizarre to think about it in that way. So what happened was I had a storage unit in Tampa. And I can't prove this exactly, but there were only a handful of people that knew I had a storage unit there. And many, many, many months after I had moved out, I'm assuming the owners of the storage unit called up the police and basically said there was an Arab man. And so the actual experience was, it was pretty scary. I mean, but I guess on the other hand, most terrorist suspects' reactions is, how can I help you? What can I do for you? And usually we get like angry, like, how dare you kind of accuse me? And sure, yeah, there was some of that at the beginning, but then what? Then what do I do after that? After a couple of weeks of being mad about it, it's like, well, okay, I can either stay like this or I can do something else about it. And then, so in a way, in recounting what had happened, in recounting everything that I told the FBI, so I started creating my own parallel database to what the FBI has, and then that's when I decided to publicly go public with the data. It was a pretty scary experience. It happened in Tampa, Florida. I was living there at the time. I was teaching at the University of South Florida, which actually there was already another faculty member there that was already taken in by Homeland Security. Actually, I don't think it was pre-Department of Homeland Security. So he was a U.S. citizen, but then he was deported and then sent out. There's all these interesting things all these bizarre overlaps of things that happened over there. But you're also dealing with. I mean, we like to think that but things were different back then. We reacted to terrorism different because we were very sensitive at the moment. I really would like to think. I don't think things have changed much. We just kind of gotten used to it in a different way, and we've internalized and we've just accepted this as the norm. So there's a very different type of normal that we have now that has just been extended outward from that era. I mean, in a lot of ways, it changed a lot of parts of the U.S. But another thing, if you think about it, 9/11 in a way, yes, it affected New York City drastically. I mean, I grew up in New York City, and I think about it this way: how yes, it affected New York City, but it didn't really change the city as much as it changed many parts of the other parts of the country. I mean, there are parts in rural parts of the U.S. where actually there was a news report recently about someone in northern Minnesota telling them about the Muslims are coming to wage jihad in some remote town in northern Minnesota. I mean, it's really like fear-mongering, really, more so than anything. So many parts of the U.S. has changed after that. But I guess in a lot of ways, the places that, like D.C. and New York, who probably experienced the most direct impact, very little of the identity of the cities have changed. So I think that's something to keep in mind because, if you think about D.C. and New York, as at least the people that live there, were the most reluctant to go to war over this, whereas many parts of the country were like, let's go bomb everything over there. So I think there's a certain type of things that there's a certain new normalcy, which is actually, the new normal was a thing that I guess Dick Cheney had coined as describing this reality. Cool. Do you have a few more minutes or?
Yeah, we have
okay.
time for a couple more questions.
One more? Okay.
So you, sir.
I'm done.
Wonderful.
So, hi, Hasan. So Anthony Weiner, like you, has found
Yes.
himself at the nexus of self-reporting,
Yeah.
government investigation into his personal data.
Yeah.
So I was just wanting your comments.
My photos are a little different than his. There's a few things in there that's kind of embarrassing, but I do have some limits. I mean, I say I show you everything, and I kind of do show you everything, but you just have to go through some. But the problem is Anthony Weiner only has some of those images. If he actually had like 60,000 images, we probably would never find those. So I think this is another way of putting this. It's like having a little bit of information about you could be really dangerous. No, so I think this is something that we talk about a lot, particularly on college campuses, and things about like, well, you have that one photo of you passed out and drunk or something. But if that's one of like 5,000 or 50,000, it just makes you look normal. Where if that's your only one, it looks pretty bad. So I think one of the things is like, what's your digital footprint? Think how, what kind of information exists about you publicly and privately. And there is a certain. I mean, you see those beds. The thing is, but a lot of people say, well, if you have nothing to hide. Well, even if you have nothing to hide, you don't want someone watching you sleeping. It doesn't matter what you're doing. The bed is one of those weird lines where you do not want that crossed. So I think this type of internal and external, I think that part's important. And I really also think that thinking about Anthony Weiner, it's like, yeah, I mean, you can't hide about this. I mean, there's just too much of this data. That's in a similar thing. If you think about, I was thinking about David Petraeus, the former head of the CIA. I mean, this is like the top spy in the entire country, and he can't even keep his he couldn't keep his affairs secret. I mean, like if he can't even keep it, what hope does any of us have to keep anything secret? So I think we need to kind of start thinking about this. Like everything that exists in digital form means that everything can be duplicated and copied and replicated and distributed. I mean, WikiLeaks is a perfect example. I mean, once it's out, it doesn't go away. I mean, the way the digital information just spreads everywhere, and at the level that it spreads at, it's pretty scary to think about it. So if it exists as data, it's going to get out sooner or later. And that's something that we haven't really figured out how to fully secure digital information. And this is why it's such a massive business. Cool.
We have time for just one more question.
Great. Somebody over there.
Thank you.
So this is the sticky question. Petraeus and a guy in New Jersey, they're well-known characters. They're well-known people. But here we are, just a bunch of normal people. I presume maybe there's some very famous people in this audience, but pretty much going about our own business, and we're not stepping on anybody's toes, so to speak. What kind of footprint can we be leaving that we don't know about?
Yeah. Okay. So I think there's a couple of things. One, so if I can back up just a little bit about that. So in a lot of ways, I'm really not that. Maybe I shouldn't put it in these words, but I'm not really that scared of the government watching me. I've basically decided, guys, you want to watch me? I'll watch myself. But I'm actually kind of scared. What happens if my health insurance company gets a hold of this? Or I think this is a serious concern for many of us. It's like, you eat like crap. We're dropping you. Yeah. I mean, this is real. This could happen. I know. I'm working on it. But I think this is something that affects all of us. It's like, wait, this is too risky. You're doing things that we don't want to pay for, and eventually it probably will be an economic decision of some sort that will come back together. So I think one of the things is that all of us, whether we're aware of this or not, that's actually really good. Whether we're aware of it or not, we're all creating these data sets. We're all generating all of this, and whether we have access to them or not, sometimes they're being created without us even knowing. And that's something that we have to be careful about as far as what information is out there. Well, you know what, the Fitbit actually have you looked at your data? Have you looked at your health app? Yeah, so your health insurance company, you stopped walking for a few months. It's like you're not exercising. I mean, yeah, I mean, imagine that data going to them. But your Fitbit, or even your phone, I mean, when you look at your health app and you look at the steps, it knows exactly what second you took and what direction, and this is how it knows how many floors you've climbed. It's kind of creepy. Yeah, actually, hey, let's creep everybody out to finish this. So we're talking about the phone. How many of you have iPhones? I mean, this is possible to do in an Android, but pull out your phones. Pull out your phones, because this, and some of you may already have this off, but some of you may not. There's going to be at least one person that doesn't have this off. So, well, yeah, it's okay, but go into your phone, go into your settings, go to, settings, privacy. Some of you may actually have this off, and you might already know what I'm showing, but scroll towards the bottom until you see system services. Do you see that? No. Okay. Okay, so you want settings, privacy, location services. Sorry, did I skip that part? Okay, go to location services, scroll towards the bottom, system services. Once you see system services, go in it. Keep scrolling towards the bottom. Don't go too far to the bottom, but towards the bottom, you'll see a thing called frequent locations. You see it? Go in it, and then go into each of those. So your phone's keeping track of you no matter where you're going. It's also like, it's like, what are you doing here? Even places you're not supposed to be at, it knows. Location services, then scroll down to system services, and then go into frequent locations. It's towards the bottom. And then all of those inside. And then go into each of those tabs. Well, yeah, so scroll up, no. Go into location services. Oh, go into privacy from here. Privacy. And then location services, and then scroll down to system services. Go in it. Go further down, keep going. Frequent location, a little bit further up. Go just a little further up. System services.
I'm afraid, folks, that's all the time we have today.
Go in it.
Now that that's within us, thank you so much for joining us here today at the Block Museum. Thanks to Northwestern. Thank you to our speaker, and please enjoy the rest of this festival.
You cleared it.